Yeah, I guess we're taking a trip down memory lane on this one. My family and I were taking a road trip. I was around 5 or 6 years old, maybe younger. Now, before we left, we had to say goodbye to a few friends, but as we got along, I remember sitting in the back seat, staring up at the sky, and in my childlike logic, I thought it would be a good idea to say goodbye to God as well. I looked up, I waved, and I said, "Bye, God." Cute story, right? Well, not to my mother. Her eyes went wide, not in delight, but in panic. She turned to me and quickly started explaining God's omnipresence in terms that a child might understand, but the way she said it stuck with me. There was a fear in her voice, a kind of urgency, almost anger. I felt like I had done something terribly wrong, like my clothes were on fire, and she was desperately trying to snuff out the flames. That moment stayed with me. I internalized it. I learned that anything I said about God had to be carefully measured and perfectly aligned with what we believed. As I got older, I realized it wasn't just about what I said, it was about what I asked as well. Questions weren't safe. I could ask for clarifications, sure, but I couldn't question the answer. I saw what happened to my older siblings when they did. If they dared to challenge an explanation, it was met with shame, dismissal, and sometimes anger. I realized later that this was actually a common occurrence in many religions and faith communities. I and countless others learned to filter every thought, every word. Does this question challenge what I've been taught? Does it show a lack of faith? Does it make me rebellious? I feared the shame that would come from voicing those questions, so I didn't. Doubts weren't safe. Compliance and acceptance were. I pushed my questions to the back burner of my mind, locked them away, and tried to forget them. But eventually I just couldn't anymore. And let me tell you, that step of honestly wrestling with my faith, it was messy, it was painful, it was lonely. But it was also the most important turning point in my life. I used to think that faith was about knowing the right answers, about having everything figured out. Faith meant certainty, and certainty was safety. If you didn't have it, then you were on shaky ground, and shaky ground was dangerous. But at a certain point, I realized something. The certainty that I'd been holding on to wasn't faith. It was fear. It was a refusal to wrestle with the hard questions of Scripture. Now, for many, the idea of that is unthinkable. But how many in Christianity have spent so much time building walls and moats and towers to protect their faith? And they're so convinced of the strength of their fortress that they didn't even notice that they were on shaky ground in the first place. Even worse, in their attempt to create a strong faith, they have actually made their faith brittle, unable to absorb shock, unable to grow, unable to withstand test. When confronted with something incompatible with their understanding, they go into cognitive dissonance, ignoring evidence or viewpoints that conflict with their pre-approved beliefs that they heard on Sunday. Now, wrestling isn't a sign of weak faith. It's the very essence of faith. We see this all over Scripture. But here's one example. Now, think about Jacob in our reading today. In Genesis chapter 32, the text says he wrestled with a mysterious figure through the night. Jacob doesn't know for sure who he's grappling with. Is it God, an angel, a stranger? The text doesn't really say how Jacob knew it was God, but somehow in that struggle he came to that conclusion, and maybe that's the point. Faith is often like that. You don't always know what you're wrestling with, but you hold on because something deep down inside of you knows that it matters. There are a lot of things happening right now, as we're speaking, things that we know matters. Take your pick of which one. And sometimes we find ourselves not knowing what to do. If our efforts even matter, will we move the needle at all? Now, for many, the idea of a collective push, gathering together to make a stand or make a statement, is the most important thing, and that is important. We have the chance to stand for something every day. What that is depends on your own abilities, circumstances, and willingness. I cannot and I should not tell you what and how to do that, but we, as a whole, can and should gather together, talking to each other to collectively figure out what we should do and how to support one another in those things. But often enough, we may find ourselves alone in a circumstance where we have the opportunity to take a stand, but we don't know what to do. Well, Jacob was alone in this story, and there's so much that he didn't know, at least according to the text. Jacob, however, held on for dear life, refusing to let go. I'm confident that if you're listening to this, you have wrestled with God. You've confronted those hard questions. You've refused to go solely on blind faith. You have built a faith that wrestles with God, and as a result, you have found a faith that is not easily shattered. That I believe to be true. But now the question is, how do we then take that faith into the world and demonstrate what it means to us? Jacob didn't start the night with clarity or certainty, neither did he end the night with answers. But he certainly did end it with something profound. You see, when Jacob walked away from his encounter, he had two things: a new name, Israel, which literally means one who struggles with God, and a limp. The limp is such a striking part of the story. And notice that God didn't heal Jacob before he left. He didn't send him off in perfect condition, ready to take on the world. No, Jacob left the encounter changed, marked by the struggle. The limp wasn't a sign of failure. It wasn't a punishment. It was a reminder that Jacob had wrestled with God. He had held on through the night. The truth is, faith changes us. Wrestling with God and wrestling with what we should do to express our faith in the world will leave its mark on you. It can be messy, it's hard, and sometimes it's painful. And those marks, those scars, those limps, they're not something to hide. So don't be ashamed of your limp. Don't hide your scars. Wear them as a testament to the God who meets us in the struggle, who wrestles with us through the night, and who blesses us even as he changes us. And if you don't have scars or limps, maybe it's time to get some, especially now. Because in the wrestling, in the questions, in the doubts, the disagreements, and yes, even in the confrontations, we might just find God waiting to bless us. I'm John DeHoyas. Peace, love, and tortillas.